Okay, we got a green light. We're going to get to work. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, June 8th, 2023 meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. We are doing these meetings in a virtual way, and this morning we only have community comment. There is no public hearing this morning, so people will not be able to participate in any public hearing. But if you want to call in for community comment and you want to talk to the HRA about a matter that's of concern to you that's not on the agenda or otherwise scheduled for a future public hearing before the HRA, you can feel free to call in. Here's the number on the screen. Conference PIN number, press *1 once you get in there, and the operator will bring in the Director Benarat, and she'll bring you into the HRA. With providing that information, I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask our Administrative Planning Specialist, Liz Olson, to call the roll. Ms. Olson.
Commissioner Risser. Here. Commissioner Jackson. Here. Commissioner Pierce.
Here.
Chair Hubland.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thanks everybody. We've got a form of agenda in front of us for the meeting today. It's been published to the public. Is there anyone that wishes to modify the agenda in any form or fashion, either a commissioner or a staff member? All right. Hearing nothing, well, wait a minute. We're going to do the community comment first, I see, on the agenda here. So we're back. No, we have to approve the agenda. I got a little ahead of myself there. Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Pierce to approve the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the meeting agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now we're on to community comment. Let's get that number back up on the screen again, and then let's check with our folks in the audience to see whether there's anyone out in the audience that wishes to address the HRA in a matter of concern to them that's not on the agenda today or otherwise scheduled for a future public hearing. Okay. No one coming forward in the audience. I'm not hearing anybody say they want to speak with the HRA. How about online? Director Benarat, anybody?
I don't have anyone online yet. However, because there is that brief delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait 1 minute before moving on. My clock shows that it's 7:37, so I will come back to you at 7:38 or when I have a caller, whichever is first.
Thank you.
It is now 7:38, and I still don't have a caller, so I think it's safe for you to move forward with the agenda.
Practice, we'll go to the Executive Director for any response to community comments that were made in the prior meeting.
We have no previous community comments at our prior meeting.
Next is, thank you. Next is the potential adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Is there anyone on the commission that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? All right. Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Pierce moves. Commissioner Jackson seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Okay. I'm having a little computer issue this morning. That's why we're having this little sidebar conversation. All right, now we're on to the heart of the meeting, which is the reports and recommendations portion of the meeting. one of our, Commissioner Pierce has to leave by 8:30, so I'm hoping we can move promptly through this matter, which is, I think, not only confusing to people in their community, but confusing sometimes to us as well, that forget about the deadlines we have over at the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. So their deadlines don't match up with our process, and so I think you've got a good way of describing this, as you said earlier this morning. It's kind of the sketch plan of financing, but let's talk it through, because I know a lot of folks that are interested in this project on both sides of it are potentially confused as well. So, Director
Yes.
Hawkinson, thanks for being with us this morning. Manager Hawkinson, and let's walk through this matter together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, as you stated, this stage in the game, this is analogous to a sketch plan review as it relates to site plan, where there has not been a formal application submitted, but because of timing with our funding partners, we give a nod of support to affordable housing in the city in order to be able to leverage other funding. But there's multiple opportunities to weigh in and to vote and to have public hearings later on in the process. Because of the questions that I'm receiving and the calls and the emails, since this is the first 100% affordable housing development that we've reviewed in a while, I'm going to back up and talk about affordable housing a little bit generally. I know you all know it, but there's a lot of interested people in this room and watching that may have not gone through the affordable housing process before, and how it is vastly different than either an inclusionary housing project or even a market rate project. Timing is different, process is different, review is different, and so I just want to give a little high-level, non-geographic specific overview of affordable housing, if I may be so indulged to do so. So the reason why we even engage in affordable housing is there's been a lot of studies, both on a state level, national level, local level, about the need for housing that is affordable to the general worker in the area. And so there was a Minnesota Governor's Task Force on Housing that said that we needed to build 300,000 new units of what would be affordable, attainable housing by 2030 in order to have the state maintain some sort of competitive economic edge in the nation for attracting jobs, workers, etc. There's a metro context. The Federal Reserve Bank says that the increased cost of housing driven by too little housing supply relative to housing demand threatens the vibrancy of the Twin Cities economy. Itasca Project of Housing Innovation also. I mean, there's just been a lot. And I know you all know that, but I just wanted to help set the table and lay some grounding for why we're even here today. So the city, we have some guiding documents that as a staff member, I help use when analyzing projects that come before me to see if they at all align with some of the guiding documents. And then when presenting information to you, I try to present information that's based on reviewing it, the financing, the logistics of it, the rationale of it, and then see if it all aligns with the policies. So the city has a goal of creating 1,804 new affordable housing units by 2030. We also have a climate action plan goal that says average population per developed acre by 4% by 2030. And so they talk about the relationship between density and housing density and carbon emissions. Promote more compact development that reduces sprawl, create a strong and growing tax base, be open and inclusive community. So these are elements of city goals by which I, as a staff, try to weigh projects that come before me so I can provide you with the information to make that you need to be able to make decisions. But to do all these, to meet these goals, we are not developers. We don't do this work. So we have development partners. And so I approach this as that that the developers are our partners. We have our goals that need to be maintained, but that we need to work with them to try to make it so they can help you achieve your goals. But developers also have risk. There's environmental concerns, cost uncertainties, interest rates, financing, site plan approval, and so they enter into this whole foray knowing that they have to navigate some risk as well when they move forward on a development. But let's get back to some grounding. What does affordable even mean? Generally, affordable housing means that a household does not spend more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. So 70% of their income can be spent food, health, entertainment, shoes, anything else that also helps create a vibrant economy if they're spending 30% on their housing costs. For rental housing and for affordable housing, when you use it, in quotes, it means that we're providing housing that is affordable to households that earn 60% of the area median income or less. In Edina, right now, 45% of renters are housing cost burdened. They are paying more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. There's concern generally here nationally about what is the impact on surrounding housing values. What is the impact of affordable housing in a community? And based on research that we find, some of it's local, some of it's national, we're not seeing any negative impact of affordable housing on surrounding housing values. I'm not going to go over these slides, they're in the packet, but just to demonstrate that this is not a concern that's unique to here. It is part of the national dialogue on this topic. So, affordable housing, there are tables that are published by the federal government, and then we find them locally through Minnesota Housing's website, and we post them on what it means. And these tables are typically adjusted in April every year, although we have not seen the 2023 tables. So this is based on 2022 numbers because they haven't published the new tables yet. And for a 30%, when we talk about 30% AMI, area median income, it means a household that earns $24,660 for a one-person household, or $35,000 for a four-person household. At 60% AMI, it's close to $50,000 for one person and $70,000 for a four-person household. So these are people that are working, but the incomes at their jobs are not sufficient to pay the rising rent levels or the rising housing costs. Affordable rents are also maxed. There is limits on what can be charged when you are a bona fide government-supported affordable housing project on rents that can be charged. And this includes everything that costs to live in the home. So for a studio at 30%, it's $616. And at a four-person household, or two-bedroom, at 60%, it's $1,500, or almost $1,600. And that is, again, 2022 numbers. By the time projects that are in the pipeline now get developed, it could be different than this. There was an 8% roughly bump in rents and incomes from one year to the next in these recent tables. And so we anticipate that the rents will be higher and the income limits will be higher in the next few years. But what this means is that when there are housing costs to construct, developers cannot exceed these rents. And the rents are used to pay all their operating costs and to leverage bank financing. So if there are cost overruns, or if the cost to create a project is greater than what the bank can leverage, what the rents can leverage, there's a gap. They cannot make up that difference by charging more. Market rate can. Market rate can look at that, add amenities, figure out ways that they can get more income. Affordable housing, they're capped. They cannot raise their income in order to cover increased interest rates, increased supply costs, anything else. So developers tend to maximize the rents that they're able to charge in order to leverage as much debt as they can from a bank. So what this means is in a basic pro forma, any construction is, you have the acquisition costs, your hard construction costs, soft developer fee, financing fees. Those are fairly typical for market rate or affordable. But where it's different is that on the debt, which is the net operating income, you can leverage a certain amount of debt, but then there's a gap. What we call gap financing is needed in order to meet the full total development costs. And that gap tends to be filled with low-income housing tax credits or government support through TIF, deferred loans, grants. Somehow it has to offset that shortfall in order to build a project. So there's the need for public financing. The rents are not sufficient enough to pay for the project. So typically, for affordable housing development, debt financing may account for 25 to 60% of what it costs to build the project, which means 75 to 40% needs to come from other sources that tend to be government. Basic scenario, market rate development, you're holding things equal, you get private equity, you get it to balance. But with a 60% building, because of the rental income being lower, it's just another way of illustrating it, your maximum mortgage is less, which is what causes, in this example, almost a $7 million gap. So that's why government becomes involved. So what do we use to fill that gap? TIF, pooled TIF, trust fund, regulatory incentives, HRA levy, revolving loan funds, project bond. This is what cities, not necessarily Edina, but generally. And then there's other soft sources of funding, because cities can't do this on their own. It's too much. Like in the project today, it'd be a $25 million gap. It just is not tenable for any city to be able to do that on their own. So we rely on Minnesota Housing, the Metropolitan Council, and Hennepin County in order to help create these projects. But these sources are really, really competitive. They tend to get twice as many applications as they're able to finance. Here's a project that happened in Edina, and these are the sources that went into it. There's tax credits. They're able to leverage $5 million in debt financing. The city provided 2.4. The state deferred loan was $2 million. Then there's TIF and county and Met Council funds that were able to make it up. I worked on a project once, not here, that had 24 sources of financing. So what are our funding partners' priorities? And this goes to the Minnesota Housing. These applications happen once a year, and they have this whole public review process of what they're financing. It's called a QAP.
I think you should really emphasize that, because it's really an important consideration here. I think it's why we are where we are today,
Right.
Because of the timetable that they use for funding applications. If you can only apply for funding once a year,
Correct.
then it oftentimes doesn't match up with the process sequence that cities are using on a particular project as to whether to approve or not approve it. So it really I think you should spend a little bit more time talking about that sort of awkward situation that communities like us get put into if we're not in the right timing sequence, which we aren't.
You are correct. Thank you, Chair, for pointing that out. Minnesota Housing application is due in early July. It used to be end of June. They pushed out to early July. The Metropolitan Council applications are due in either end of August or early September. Again, that used to be June. They're bumping them out a little bit. And Hennepin County applications are due in February. So there is a cycle of annual applications that come through. The only applications at our pipeline are city, where it is more of an open pipeline process. The other funding partners, for example, and I'll touch on the next slide, this applicant did apply for Hennepin County funds in February to start the process. And of all the applications that went to Hennepin County this year, only one that did not already receive city support was financed, and that was for a 100%, 30% AMI project. All the ones that did not receive city support as the first source in were rejected. They did not receive their financing.
Member
So-
Risser, Commissioner Risser has a question. This has prompted her to think of something.
Yeah, I understand about, deadlines and all of that, but also I'm surprised that the state of Minnesota and this particular entity will consider projects that have yet to be vetted by the public, where the public hearing has not happened, where there is no formal approved site plan. Could you please speak to that?
Chair, Commissioners, they do not, from my experience in working on these applications directly, they do not look at where they are in the public process with regards to public hearings. There is a long vetting system about how the project complies with approved plans. So they look at the parallel, and there's long narratives of how projects align with the comprehensive plans, because the state considers the comprehensive plan to be the public vetting system. So that's how the state looks at it, but they don't look at the individual public hearings of the individual projects.
So to be clear, there does not need to be a formal approved site plan in the application.
That is correct, because with affordable housing projects, to get to a formal site plan it costs a lot of money. To get all the architectural details at that level to get a site plan approved. And as there's no bandwidth really with the financing of affordable housing developments, it's hard to invest the level of capital that is needed to get to a formal site plan without some assurance that there's going to be financing in place to do so. So often, this is what's interesting about affordable housing versus market rate housing, is that instead of one following the other, they go in tandem. So oftentimes the financing and the site plan we go side by side. Final approvals, for getting a final approval from the city, and will follow final site plan approval. So there has to be an approved site plan before the city will approve final financing. But at this stage in the game, the state does not look at that.
Commissioner.
So if that final site plan doesn't look like what we're seeing in the sketch plan, it's still okay if that final site plan is not 89 apartment units, but at our council meeting, Member Pierce brought up a potential scenario of townhouses. Could we simply switch projects and all the funding agencies would be okay with that?
No. I will be blunt on that. No. The application that will go into the state and go into the Met Council and go into the Hennepin County, if we say it's 80, if they in their applications are approved for 89 units, and then they go back and they say it's actually 60 units or 40 units, then because there's a point system and funding criteria, it would have to be re-underwritten and the funding would be pulled away. But that also means that it gives the city some leverage that if this project gets approved, from this preliminary stage today, the city has all the capacity to go through the public process, to go through site plan, and then you could say, no, we want a different project. It would then make it so they don't get that financing or they have to return that financing. That would happen, but that is a choice that can be made on your part.
I promise this is the last question at this point.
No, Commissioner, that's
fine. As somebody who has submitted grant applications to federal agencies in the capacity of working for a large institution and being one subset of that institution, I was very mindful of making sure that every single thing that I was submitting in that application was something that I truly believed was going to be the end product. And part of that was because I was concerned about the ability of the institution as a whole to submit future grant applications to all of these different entities, because our credibility is on the line. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Chair, Commissioners, that is correct. But it doesn't mean that your hands, based on a decision today, are tied. The risk is that they would lose, if they are approved, there are funding criteria that's presented on this slide. If they say that they are providing family housing, and they get scored because they are providing family housing, and then they are no longer providing family housing, it would affect the scoring. And so they would say, okay, the project changed, you have to turn back, you're no longer awarded this funds. But the city, you retain that authority to say, okay, we don't want it the way it is. There's no binding, you're not bound to that, but they would lose the funding. But this allows the conversation to continue. So as I was saying,
It's hard to even, the more you think about it, it's hard to even call it a process. It just seems like all the balls are in the air at the same time, and you don't really have a process. And so for people in our community that are seeing us sit today as the HRA and sit 2 nights ago as the City Council, and we got the same thing in front of us today that we had in front of us the other night just for a sketch plan review. And now we're asking the HRA, the economic development arm of the city, to say, we support this project by resolution. And as I understand it, the resolution can't even have a lot of contingencies in it, or they won't pay much attention to it either. So if I want to wordsmith this resolution to provide more contingencies on city council approval, for example, of the project, that may not be well received either. So you have to be at a certain level of commitment, and you might want to talk about that. I mean, what level of commitment do they expect over at Minnesota Housing Finance? Because that'll determine what kind of commitment we're prepared to make today.
And if I could just add on to that,
please.
Mr. Chair. So the resolution, the way I understand this, it is that particular project. So it says 89 affordable rental apartment units, right, is in here. There's some contingencies in here as well, but it frames that as the project. And so one of the challenges I have is I'm not sure that that is the right project for that area. And so the questions I asked, what about ownership for townhomes in that space? If this is approved, that option can't be progressed in our process because it's a different project, is the way I'm interpreting this. But they could go from 89 to 95 or 89 to 85 as long as the construct is still affordable rental apartments and continue through the process. But if it's a different construct altogether, then you're saying we're not bound, which I get that, but it just seems out of sequence. It doesn't make sense to me that if sitting here today, I think we should have a different project there. I don't understand why I would approve this, even to keep the process going. And so that's the challenge I have. It would be different, if I say one more thing, it would be different if we were asking for $2 million for the developer to then go figure out what's the best type of affordable housing for that lot. And then they come back with, oh, you know what? It'd be better if we had a mix of rental and some townhomes that would fit. Right? But we're not doing that. This is asking for the city to support $2.5 million for 89 affordable rental apartments on that lot.
Chair, Commissioner, you're right. I mean, in the resolution, it does say that the funding is contingent upon site plan approval. So it does say that in the resolution. but it does have a sunset period that the money goes away if there's not site plan approval and all the funding in place by a certain date, then the resolution is null and void. So it does say that, but you are correct. They have to apply to Minnesota Housing for a specific development. And so the resolution does reflect the development for which they are applying to Minnesota Housing. No resolution pretty much makes the application to Minnesota Housing. I mean, they could proceed, but they have been told by staff that it is a non-starter for the amount of assistance that they're asking for if there is not a nod from the city with regards to support. But the resolution is contingent upon site plan approval. This is the challenge of creating affordable housing anywhere. This is the game, as it were, that is played to do any affordable housing in any community is jumping through these hoops that don't make sense. This is why a lot of developers don't do affordable housing. This is why a lot of affordable housing does not get built, because there's this, I have a slide ahead where it's threading a needle to make sure everything lines up in order to make it happen.
Right.
And that's why it is so challenging.
That's complete your sequence of thoughts or questions for now?
For now.
Yeah, because Commissioner Risser once says, what you asked caused her to think of something else too.
It did. And also what you just noted. And I understand the hurdles are complicated and they're challenging. I feel for the developer, but I also feel for the residents, the citizens of Edina, and I also feel for, today I'm a commissioner. I will be a city council person. My colleagues will be up there for city council, and I would like us to be viewed with credibility and for our decisions to be viewed as if they are fair. And I have a really hard time with this scenario because if we do approve this resolution, in a way it feels like we are preemptively saying that we will vote for this specific project. And then what does that do for public process, for our credibility, just for the whole neighborhood? Because we ideally, and I have heard from people who are so supportive of this project and people who are not, and people who are kind of in the middle. But there is tremendous feeling that we do need more affordable housing and that we do need to have it spread out throughout Edina. And so I don't want to do something that is going to add to feelings of contention and disenfranchisement and all of that. And so I am super concerned about alienating people by moving forward this way. And yes, there are a lot of hurdles, but they're intentional. And I think having an approved site plan is kind of a minimum standard. And I'm sort of surprised, and I kind of want to pursue this with my elected official, if we do not have language in our Minnesota laws that says municipalities cannot provide financial assistance for affordable housing that has not gone through a site plan review and has that approval, I think we should have that in place, because it does really feel like it is asking elected officials to take a stand, and we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to indicate how we're going to vote on things before they come to us. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's that public trust is such an important thing, and the sequence of this whole thing is what's, I think you can see, is bothering all of us, because for the public, they see us wearing the HRA hat this morning, and then we're going to take this matter up in due course, assuming they file for preliminary approval, which I think they will. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here asking for our support from an HRA standpoint for their funding applications over with the state and the county and the Met Council. So it really is. It's about as awkward a situation as you can find. And to your point that you just made, it makes you wonder why anybody even tries to do affordable housing, even though all of us believe in the notion that everybody ought to have a home. And for someone like the developer, Mr. Gunsbury, trying to weave his way through this miasma is really it's risky. It's high risk for him too, and it gets emotions going in neighborhoods in both ways. And our broader sort of group of folks in town that are real strong supporters of affordable housing, they even realize, I think, the awkwardness of this process. And so we got to figure out a pathway here, because we're going to have somebody that we think is important to this conversation needing to leave in 20 minutes. So I'm going to turn now to Commissioner Jackson, who hasn't had a chance to give us her thoughts.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to start by saying, and I'm imagining Commissioner Agnew here, look at the phenomenal talent in this room. Look at the phenomenal talent in this community. We just heard this is the game that can be played, and my question is, can we change the game? This is Edina. I serve on the City Climate Caucus, Cities Climate Caucus, it's hard to say, and we just went through what happened at the legislature this year. And thanks to Representative Larry Kraft, on the climate, we took things that we here in Edina and other cities have done by grit and by community involvement, and it's now state law. Cities are a lab, and it's a little tiny lab. We have limited money, we have limited power, but we can change the game, and we've changed the game at the state level, and we've changed the game at the federal level. I don't like this game. I am really upset about having to make a decision this morning, and I apologize if I lose my temper, because I don't like to make decisions in a hurry, and I feel rushed, I feel pressured from both sides. And I'm a decision maker. I'm the one who has to make a decision today. So I went back, and it's always when you're in a situation, you look at your values. And I looked at the values viewfinder. This is city decision, and community engagement is one of the things, one of our primary values. And I can argue this both sides. The neighbors are saying this is too fast, we haven't been heard, and I'm hearing from advocates and advisors that this is just to keep the conversation going. It's to keep it open, and that's where we started, is a sketch plan of financing. So that I can argue either side. The other value is, oh golly, I've got so many notes here. We need affordable housing. There is a housing crisis, and I think that is, I'm 100% committed to addressing that. But how? And then the third one is just a personal value, and that is whenever you feel pressured or rushed to make a decision, you should consider saying no really strongly. So that's kind of where my values are. They're all over the place, right? We have, and at the city council meeting, the mayor brought up the idea that there's a tremendous amount of new money coming in to MFHA. We have a commissioner at the Hennepin County level who is strongly committed to affordable housing, and he's just such a force of energy, and this is his passion. So we've got Hennepin County, we've got the state with a governor who has just created a complete new system, this is a revolution at the legislature this year, who is committed to affordable housing. And we've got a developer here who is exceptionally creative, just really comes in, understands how to work with people and make things happen. We've got you, just an incredibly innovative staff person who looks at affordable housing and what can we do. And then, as the mayor mentioned, we have the Edina way. We can do things differently from how they've been done before. We are innovators here in this city. And like I said, we've seen, when we addressed the building benchmarking, we were the second city in the state to do it. We worked with the county, we worked with stakeholders, and now it's state law. So I've seen this happen, that we can change the game. The question is, do we have to approve this resolution today in order to keep working on changing the game, or is it a longer process where we probably shouldn't commit to 89 rental apartments today in order to change the game? And that's where I'm at. Honestly, I don't know how to decide, but I know that our community can break through barriers. We can change the discussion around this. And I just want to put that out there.
Commissioner Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I separate those two things. I agree with Commissioner Jackson. We can change the game. And I can say we're working on trying to do that in a number of ways. But I kind of put that on the side, and I try to simplify things as much as I can to start my process of figuring out what I want to do. And so on the side, I think for me, there's a couple of things in here that are a challenge. And the biggest one I talked about earlier, I'm just not sure that this is the right project for that space. It has nothing to do with, do I support affordable housing or not? I do support affordable housing, and I am trying to find ways to change the game, to accelerate some of our work. But I'm not sure that this project, if it goes forward, would get approved. And so, should we be spending the effort and time to do that? Is that fair to the developer to have this sense that this is going to go forward, and we, go the 9th mile and it doesn't get approved, or it does get approved, but there's a potential that it might not? Is that fair to the developer? And then the last thing I'll say, just to go back to Commissioner Risser, I do trust the process, right? We sit up here as the council, but this is still a democratic process, right? It's granted, right, it's a micro scale because there's 5 of us, but we do independently assess, and we independently will have to vote. That vote will be tallied. It's influenced by our constituents. And so I do trust that process. So I don't think there's anything in there that makes me nervous about if we were to make a decision, if we voted and it moved forward. I would trust that we would go through the process and the outcome would be what it would be. And whether I voted for or against, this is a body. I would support the direction that the body chose to go. But when I step back, I just think the sequence of this doesn't make sense to me. And those are the 2 areas where if we talk about height and size, I understood from the developer there's a model, right? You talked about it, Manager Hawkins, right? There's a model, there's an algorithm that goes into it that dictates size and units. And so, okay, I get that. But I do feel like that really does constrain us from a timing perspective as we move forward. So.
For Commissioner, thank you, Commissioner. For Commissioner Jackson, who spent several years over at the legislature working on behalf of cities across Minnesota, the solution could be at the legislature. The solution could be at the Minnesota Housing Finance with respect to how they operate. Manager Neal and I were in a meeting yesterday of what's called the Municipal Legislative Commission, and a lot of folks, we've got people in our audience this morning that aren't normally here, but they're interested in this project I'm assuming from the neighborhood. And we gave an award out to Mike Howard, who was the chair of the Housing Committee. We were going to give one to the person who runs the Senate committee as well, but she's got long-term COVID, and so she wasn't able to appear. But what we have now coming into the Minnesota Housing Finance is $1 billion that was approved by this legislature for housing affordability issues and challenges all across the state of Minnesota. And Representative Howard said that Minnesota Housing Finance doesn't even know what all the different categories are and how they're going to use that money yet, and they won't probably know that until the end of the summer. So that's a long way of getting to this notion of once a year you can apply over at Minnesota Housing Finance with a project, even though it's way out of sequence locally. There may be opportunity based on what the legislature did to be able to provide money in a different way than has normally been provided in the past because of it's 7 or 8 times the amount of money that's ever been approved for spending for housing in the state of Minnesota in history. And so here we are with and we talked about it briefly at the city council meeting the other night. We said, well, there may be some other funding opportunities here that cause us to think that we don't have to commit as much to it because then we can spread the limited resources we have further. So it's another way of saying, I guess, that it just doesn't feel right yet, and then I think the core issue we face today is the one raised by Commissioner Pierce, and that is what we'd be sending over there is a soft approval from the HRA for funding for the project, which is the 89 unit project, and we don't even know if we would approve the project at the city council level. So if we don't get the project approved at the city council, this is all a waste of time. They're not going to get the funding. They've spent all this time. The city, the residents of our town that support it have gone through a lot of effort around supporting the housing. People in the neighborhood that have concerns about it, some of those may be allayed, some not. It's really, this whole sequencing problem is really a challenge. So I think you're getting a sentiment here that we're not there, is what I'm hearing, what I'm feeling, what I'm sensing. Commissioner?
And thank you. And to build off of the chair's points that he just made is the fact that we have to think long term because this is Edina's credibility. And this is one project. But we want people who are reviewing our projects not to be looking at them and thinking, okay, well, the HRA approved it, but and with this one, what does that conversation look like when we're trying to explain why we didn't go forward? Do we say, well, actually, this was a project on industrial land and it wasn't even land that was zoned for purely residential? I mean, there's a lot of issues here. We haven't heard back from MnDOT. We don't know what they're going to say about the setback variance requests. So I think when these applications go forward, the reason why the timing is there and the reason why you have these hurdles is to ensure that when it gets to the next level, the people reviewing the material know that you've done your due diligence. And I feel like we're signaling to this authority that we have done our due diligence. And I really do think, and I'm wondering, have we ever approved this amount of money or close to it for any private project that was just in the sketch plan phase?
Man, is that a?
That's a, yeah.
All previous affordable housing projects, Amundsen Flats, the Sound on 76th, and 4040 Flats were all had this resolution pre-sketch plan.
But my understanding is those were all projects where the HRA had purchased the land.
Chair, Commissioners, the Housing Foundation purchased the land for Amundsen Flats, but the HRA provided a resolution. So they purchased the land with the sole intent of putting affordable housing there, understanding that if it didn't go forward, they would sell the land to someone else for that project. And the HRA put a resolution in to support the MHFA application prior to site plan approval. With 4100 West 76th, the developer bought the land, and the HRA passed a resolution to support the MHFA application prior to site plan approval. And then it wasn't awarded funding the first round because there is a contingency in the HRA resolution. So during the process of going through site plan review, the HRA agreed to buy the land to save the developer the holding costs. So at that point, the HRA bought the land before site plan approval to hold it for them while they went through the site plan approval process. For 4100 or for 4040 Flats, the HRA gave a loan to the Housing Foundation to buy the land for the sole purpose of affordable housing prior to any site plan approval, and having gone through that process. So in order for all three of those projects, this process was approved early on before site plan approval in order to facilitate these applications to the state and to our funding partners.
But we don't hold this land. I mean, this is a new situation, right? We would be setting precedent by supporting this resolution?
With 4100 West 76, we did not own the land at the time that the first application went through Minnesota Housing. The developer owned the land. The developer had site control. They didn't own the land either. They had site control. This developer does not own the land. They have site control. They have a purchase agreement as they go through the process. So this is parallel and analogous to what happened for 4100 West 76th.
So how much, so funding was provided for that before the sketch plan phase?
On all of them, funding was supported through a resolution, but no actual dollars were conveyed. But the resolution was approved on all three of those developments prior to site plan approval process.
Yeah. Those same challenges existed there, to your point.
The same challenges existed for all three of those.
It created somewhat the same level of discomfort, as I recall, because we were out of process, out of sequence. But the factual circumstances around every one of those projects was far different than this, in my opinion. We didn't, you think about the sound off 76. Nobody was concerned in the broader neighborhood about that project. Nobody really had. I mean, we didn't face those sort of due process challenges that we face here, that we want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and everybody's voice matters, because we weren't getting any voices about that. And there was some initial concern over at Amundsen Flats in that neighborhood. But there you were on the site of a defunct, bankrupt dry cleaner site and next to a commercial neighborhood. And that opposition in that neighborhood seemed to wane over time, too, as they understood better the project. That may happen here, it may not, I don't know. And then 4040 had some opposition, too, but it's, we had, to me, they were factually distinguishable from this situation that we have here. Even though the process we went through in all three of those circumstances is the process you're asking us to go through now, it just doesn't feel right at this particular moment, at least for me. So,
Manager Neal.
yeah, Manager Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I can promise you that you are not the only city council in Minnesota that is struggling with this particular question. It happens everywhere. And the process, we've got a lot of different ideas for how the process could be improved, both here locally and with our peers in other communities, but we just can't do it today. In terms of the analogy of making this the sketch plan of financing compared to the sketch plan of the land use, it's a good analogy. But with one exception, and that is at the end of the sketch plan process for land use, we don't ask you to adopt a resolution saying you like it, right? You make these comments, you make individual comments about land use and design, and then that's it. There's no action that you take at the end of that process. So I feel like that's a little bit about what you're experiencing today. Is you have these comments and you want to make them, and then they have the same kind of impact. You're just giving your personal opinion and what makes you comfortable, uncomfortable, what you think is in the public interest. But there's a document at the end of this process, whereas in a sketch plan review, there is not. I think from our perspective, you have a range of options available to you. We can't change the process at this point, but we can advise you that we will carry on your recommendation to the next level and explain that process if you choose to take an action today. If you don't, we will make sure that process is identified with the developer and alternative routes are explored.
What are the, maybe this might be a question for you, if we denied or turned down this resolution today as opposed to just parking it in the parking lot for now, is there a consequence at Minnesota Housing Finance if this resolution got turned down versus just lies dormant for a while until we figure out what are, through the summer? I mean, on the application side, we know the applicant hasn't even applied, submitted an application to the planning department to get this project approved and start that clock running. So it seems to me like we got a little bit of time to see what happens with all this money that came in from the legislature, to see if some of that may be accessible in a different form than the normal format that they use, although I could also see a regulatory body at the state saying, no, we got our process, we're just going to hang in there with our process. Any thoughts on that?
Chair, Commissioners, what I have been told is that of the $1 billion, some of that is rent control, some of that are rental assistance, some of that is Greater Minnesota funds, some of that, I mean, there's lots of little pockets, that the line item that goes towards providing gap financing for affordable rental, not ownership, not down payment assistance, none of that, but for this tranche, that is in play during this application cycle, and a lot of that is one-time only money. And I don't know if the money's available next year. I don't know to what extent the money might be available next year. I do know that that money is in play this application round. I also know that they're asking for close to $12 million in gap financing from the Minnesota Housing, and they are asking for an allocation of tax credits, and that the staff there has said that it's a non-starter for the ask of $11.4 million in gap financing without a demonstration of city support. So no action would impact their ability to get that $11.4 million. It has a risk of impacting their ability to get the tax credits. And without that $11.4 million, which is a huge ask, quite honestly, I've never seen an ask this big. I saw a $5 million ask once when I was a consultant, and that was enormous at the time. So this is a large ask already, and it's because of this $1 billion that was approved. And I think I can't speak for the developer, but I think it will give them pause on how they proceed and whether or not this will kill the deal.
So I if I may, so I am really trying to cut through all of that, right? They're all facts, right? The difference to me and everything else that we've approved is that we were tweaking a design that we were good with. And so it was, all right, orient the building differently. It was, all right, adjust the setback, put the park here, right? Change the use natural stone versus, right? We were doing that with every other project. With this one, we're not even sure if it should be apartments or townhomes, right? Those were the discussions that we were having. And so for me, without that level of clarity, everything else to me is a moot point, because I would prefer to have more time actually for the developer to study and then come back with something that might fit better in that space. But then the flip side is, once we look at everything, right, there's still, right, we're kind of playing this game and saying, well, this may go forward, it might get approved. Okay, sure. It's a democratic process, that is true. It could, but that to me is the biggest difference. This, we're saying, I'm not sure if this is the right project. We're not just talking about where the tot lot is or how the building is oriented. We even talked about height, right, and size. Do we have to have 89 units? Could we do 50? Could it be 3 stories versus, right? Those are big questions that frankly change the entire project in my mind, which then would adjust all the necessary sources to make that happen, whether they need more or less, right? But without that clarity, I'm not sure how we would move forward.
I'm really sensitive to Member Pierce's other meeting, Commissioner Pierce. So I tried to go through this resolution and make it more contingent, if you will. But in conversing with Manager Neal last night, he said, if it's contingent on what we do at the city council, clearly contingent, that it doesn't have any value to Minnesota Housing Finance. And I don't, so to talk a little bit about that for a minute.
Chair, based on our experience with what happened with the Sound on 76 that had contingency language in it, they said that it didn't have value, and so they did not fund them that first round in large part because of that. It's different staff now. I mean, I can't say that absolutely definitively because there has been turnover at that time. So based on that experience, strong contingency language made the application not competitive. Mm-hmm. Does different staff and new staff look at it differently? I can't answer that definitively,
Sure.
but so I'm just going on experience.
An unfair question, really. I just wanted to get your thoughts. But back to Commissioner Pierce's point, in every other circumstance, with those other 3 projects that we approved, we knew that what the project was going to look like. We don't know what the project is going to look like here, and so we're all talking about putting our trust of our community and our credibility on the line, if you will. We're talking about affecting due process, potentially giving it that appearance anyway, by providing this kind of a support level on a project that we don't even know if it would ever be approved in the form that it was discussed in sketch plan. And we didn't even talk about phase 2. This is all phase 1, you know. So, what does if I change this resolution? First of all, we need to define the project in the resolution a little bit more with more clarity. So what I did was I said, whereas at the end here, the developer must receive site plan approval, and I interlineated from the Edina City Council prior to closing on the financing. And whereas the financing is a potential local contribution and may, not will, assist the developer in the securing approval from those 3 entities. And then on your last, second to the last resolution clause, be it further resolved, the HRA, you had shall provide in accordance with the requirements of this resolution. I didn't see any requirements in the resolution. A total of $2.5 million in order to facilitate the financing of the project. I mean, it was so definitive that that's the amount we were going to contribute, and we haven't even decided that. So I changed that language to read, be it further resolved, the HRA, and I'm just using the acronym, may potentially provide a total of up to $2.5 million in order to facilitate the financing of the project in a form approved by the Edina City Council. You know, so if we change it like that to get something done here today to stay within what the Minnesota Housing Finance has for a process, is that going to resonate? That's why I asked you the question. Is something like that going to resonate with them or not? Or are they going to say, well, throw that in the circular file, you know, and we've gone through this whole effort for nothing.
Chair, Commissioners, again, this is gut. I don't have any factual basis, and I try to provide you with factual information in order to make a decision, so this varies off of that. I would think that would be better than no resolution at all.
And then we can do our best to verbally enhance it with staff there.
All right. Commissioner Risser.
I have additional concerns about the staff report that accompanies the proposed resolution because there's very specific language there. 89-unit, 5-story building. It outlines how more specifics, and then on the second page, the financing information, key sources of funding for 5780 Lincoln will be, and then all these things are listed, including City of Edina deferred loan and or TIF. And I'm wondering, is this being submitted as part of the application? I mean, this is out there, and what is this?
Chair, Commissioners, the staff report is to help provide information to give you tools, but to which to make by which you make decisions. But the document that would be submitted would be the resolution and not the staff report. The staff report is not a legal, or it's not a binding, it's a guidance tool rather than a declarative document, if that's appropriate terminology.
Nor is it a statement of the council, it's a statement of staff.
Correct.
They're always late at the
Okay, I understand and I respect and I admire my colleagues for proposing changing language to the resolution. Again, underscoring the need for process, I would respectfully request that these edits be made, that we put them in the next packet for our next HRA meeting so that it's too late. Okay, this is still short-circuiting the public process because it gives the public no chance to look at a resolution and to provide us feedback on that. And I want to underscore process is my thing, and it makes me nervous to set precedent, and I don't want to be doing something where, you have to think any other project that comes forward that would like to have this treatment should then have it. And I really do feel that this is really rushed. I don't know if there's any way, how do we get this to the public so that we can come back and meet and discuss it? And I know Commissioner Pierce has to go someplace, so this is really putting us all under a tremendous amount of stress. So I'm going to stop talking.
Okay, yeah, let's see if we can solve that problem. Could we have a redrafting of the resolution and then have a special meeting of the HRA before the end of the month? It's June 8th,
We can. Depending on your calendars,
So
of course.
if we get this done and then schedule another meeting, get this out into the public venue so they can see the modified resolution, then at least it addresses Commissioner Risser's concerns, and I think is an expression of the concern all of us have, is that people have adequate notice of what's going on. And having a...
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The only thing that I would add in the question we were asking is, does that resolution assist with the process of getting more funding? We've not said, which I think this process would give us an opportunity, does that resolution, would that even help the developer, right? Does this conversation plus the last give them pause to want to go to the next phase at all? And so I think that warrants understanding as well. And so I think this process might actually help us get some information from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. So you're saying something's better than nothing. We didn't hear the developer's sense of that. Is that what you're getting? You want to hear
Right.
from the developer's standpoint, something is better than nothing?
Right.
Mr. Gunsbury, or one of the people on your team, do you want to answer that? Don't we have a normal HRA meeting scheduled?
We canceled it because of the League of Minnesota Cities schedule.
James and Kate, if everybody's here, because Julie now will be gone.
You guys will be at the League of Minnesota Cities?
Yeah.
Could we zoom in? I don't know.
What day do you leave?
You can't zoom in.
Wednesday?
So we could do it next week sometime, if your calendars allow. Because the deadline, again,
I
Stephanie,
believe
is
it's July
13th.
13th, July 13th.
Application is due.
So what about this, something's better than nothing idea?
Yeah, so Chair, Commissioners, I'm Old Dixit with Solheim Companies, and I want to be respectful of your time, Commissioner Pierce. So the one thing I wanted to say is just to put a little more context around the ask and how much, the 2.5 million, as well as some of the other sources. As Manager Hawkinson alluded to, the MHFA has made it pretty clear that without some sort of soft commit from the city, the chances of us, getting the points we need are slim. But more specifically, it's a certain amount of a certain percentage of the total development cost need to be committed in order to get the points we need from MHFA. So you see here, total development costs are about $38 million, and we're talking about getting to 12-13% commitment, which is why you see, in addition to the City of Edina, $2.5 million, the deferred developer fee there of $1.7 million. So what that's saying is almost 50% of the developer fee that we would receive from this whole project, we are deferring and putting at risk, because there's, in many cases with affordable housing, the developer doesn't receive much or any of that deferred fee. And so we've increased the amount of that deferred fee so that we can hit that certain percentage of total development costs, because we did not receive the award from Hennepin County. And that's a similar conversation as we're having here today, where nobody is interested in being the first funder in. Nobody's interested in being first money in, but MHFA needs to see some commitment. And so all this to say, one of the things Manager Hawkinson said at the very beginning is that developers are the partners of the city in this sort of thing. And we're looking to partner with you. We are increasing our risk exposure by increasing our developer fee, and we're looking for the city to lean in with us as a partner. To your question, Chair, I think the way I would put it is, without the soft commit, we have very little chance of moving forward with this at this time. And then given that the process is what it is today, we get put back into this cycle again, because the reality is, as Manager Hawkinson mentioned, the cost on our end to go through, to get the drawing, go through site plan, they're significant. And that's a lot of risk for the developer to take without some sense of whether or not this project is going to move forward. So it would likely cause a pause or delay in some sort, in some way. And that's also, it's assuming we can affect the broader process and timeline, which, chances of that happening are very slim. So I'm not going to say better this than nothing, because that feels like a very flippant way to address this, but I will say, if we don't get this, the chances of moving forward take a big hit.
All right, understood. Yeah, thanks for that. Well, maybe what we could do is redline this resolution, have staff redline the resolution, circulate it to you as a developer team. Mr. Gunsbury, circulate this proposed revision to your team. And if you don't, my colleagues haven't even approved this yet. But it's something at least that you could look at. If you don't think it captures sufficiently what you need to do, but our council, our HRA, is not willing to go further, then that should help you make a decision too. So I think first thing is we get this thing put in its amended form, and then we get it to the HRA members. They look at it. They can add their input, and then we'll circulate it to you. And if you don't like what you're seeing that we theoretically are comfortable with, then you'll have to make a decision.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure we can do that outside the scope of a public meeting. do the kind of the serial document review that you're suggesting?
Oh.
And then have the kind of bilateral
Well, then
negotiations with the developer?
Let's just have you make the revisions and
Yeah.
circulate it and set the meeting,
Yeah.
and then it can be discussed at the meeting.
Yes.
And we don't have to sit up here in the dais, especially with Commissioner Pierce having to leave.
Yep, we can do that. And then we can have Jennifer Garsky begin to kind of to query your various schedules to see what we can do. It could be a morning, it could be it could be a lunch hour, could be a late afternoon
I don't think we
timeframe.
need more than an hour. I think
Okay.
even a half hour might work.
Okay.
But
Or after our next council. If it's not a long.
It's gonna be a long
I'm good with that. We'll,
all right.
Sorry.
All right, so what kind of motion do you want here? Just to hold it over, table
Just
it?
need a motion to table for today
Yeah.
and direct staff to review the revisions and schedule a special meeting.
All right, got a motion to that effect?
So moved.
second.
I got a motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Pierce to table this matter of the HRA Resolution 2023-05, turn it over to staff for redrafting and set a special meeting where we can discuss a modified, potential modified resolution. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried? Okay. All right. Any quick comments?
No
Executive
comments for
Director?
me. No.
Okay. HRA comments? Commissioner comments? Okay. Interesting meeting. Thank you. Thanks for everybody being here. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Pierce to adjourn the meeting of the HRA this, 8th day of June, 2023. All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried? Stand adjourned.